Good evening or good morning, depending on your location, and welcome to Extending Microsoft's Fireserver for Azure. I'm really excited to be here with you today, but to start off, I'd like to introduce myself. Okay, who am I? Well, my name is Brendan, I live in the US, and I'm an engineer on the Microsoft Fireserver for Azure team. And in the spirit of DevDays Europe, I've included a photo that I took of myself at the Euromast in Rotterdam the last time I was here. It may be a bit of a tourist spot, but the views here are awesome. Alright, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, today I'd like to take you for an overview of the Fireserver for Azure, and then we'll look at some of the ways that you can use the Fireserver for Azure. So how we can spin it up as an application developer. So that means you don't really want to compile the code, but you do want to develop against a FHIR API. So we'll look at ways that we can do that with the open source version, both as an Azure App Service and locally for you to develop against. Next, we'll look at ways of how we can spin up the Fireserver for a developer. So this means that you do want to download the source code, compile it, and then develop and extend with the Fireserver, maybe add your own custom logic. Last, we'll look at how you can use the Fireserver for Azure as a test bed for features that will soon arrive in the managed service. So we've recently started writing this documentation so that you can test these features before they land in the production of the managed service. And lastly, we'll go through contributing and what to expect. I'll take you through the processes and features that we have so that you'll be familiar with them, how to submit issues, ask questions, and find the information that you need. And lastly, I'll cover some of the common community FAQs. So hopefully I can give you a little bit of guidance on how to approach them. And then at the end, of course, we'll do Q&A. So you can ask me anything. Okay, so 2 offerings to meet your needs. So what does that mean? So the first offering we have is the Fireserver for Azure. This is the open source version GitHub project, and that's what I'll be focusing on in my talk today. The second app is the Azure API for FHIR. So that is the managed service that our team is also running that is meant for production scenarios. So let's have a look at these 2 in a little more detail. So the Fireserver for Azure, this is an open source implementation. So we now have support for Stu 3, R4, and a beta build for R5. So if you're looking to test the latest bits. So it's easy to deploy to your own Azure subscription using the provided deployment templates. It's 100% open source, and it's a good model for you to download, extend, customize in your own Azure subscription or for your own personal testing. Okay, so Azure API for FHIR, on the other hand, is your enterprise-grade Fireserver. So this is the one that's designed for production workloads. It includes security, RBAC, it has managed identity, and we handle the scale, provisioning, the database, the updates. So we handle all of this. All you need to do is point your production workloads against it, and we'll scale for you. Okay, so before we go any further, let's have a little look at a bit of hindsight. In 2018, we released the Fireserver for Azure. We had basic Stu 3 support, a Cosmos DB data layer, and some basic search. In 2019, we extended that with R4 support, a SQL data layer, and advanced search support such as includes and chaining. We introduced the first version of bulk export and a swag of other features such as conditional updates and bundle processing and more. Now, in 2020, we've been filling out even more features, such as a beta R5 implementation. And so if you're looking at playing around with the latest models, that's the way to go. We have even more advanced search support in the SQL data layer, such as rev include. And we've been filling out some more features in the bulk export spec. So we now have group export, patient export, and we've also included recently de-identification as part of the export pipeline. So this means that you can, in one process, export your resources from the Fireserver and they'll end up de-identified when they hit the storage account. The team in the last few months have been very busy adding support for reindexing. So what this means is that you'll be able to, in the near future, have the ability to support custom search and custom search parameters. So let's have a look at getting started as an application developer. So this means we don't necessarily want to compile any code, but we do want a FHIR API up and running as quickly as possible for us to develop against, either locally or in the cloud. So if we're aiming for cloud deployment, we can use the pre-built web application templates, and I'll show you how to get both the Cosmos DB and SQL variants of these running. Okay, and similarly, we have a number of other options that you can use with Docker containers. So in a similar fashion, you can deploy a Docker template into Azure App Service, or you can pull one of the Docker templates down and run them locally. So let's have a look at how we might do this. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can use the web deploy templates. So if we switch over to the GitHub repository, I'm going to scroll down in the docs folder. And in the docs folder, we will find a whole lot of general information. So it's worth checking out here if you have a question about the architecture, structure, or other deployment options. I'm going to hit the default deployment. And although there's a lot of information in here on different ways you can deploy, probably the easiest is to come down to here and hit the deploy to Azure button. So this is going to bootstrap the default template into the Azure portal, provided you already have an Azure account. So if I'm signed in. If I wait a second for this to come up, it's ready to take me through the process for our custom deployment with the default SQL template. So we've changed to the SQL template being the default recently because it is the most capable data provider. So all we need to do here is provide the name of the resource group where it's going to put all of the resources for our Fireserver deployment. And I might say, there we go, be Kowitz test. And I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to use that as my service name as well. So that is what my website is going to be called. And if I scroll down here, we've added a new option for automatic schema updates. So in a dev test scenario, if I select true, it means that the application will deploy the database and the schema. The application will be responsible for keeping the schema up to date. But if I was looking at a more production scenario, then I would choose false. And you would choose false, it will not deploy the database or apply any of the schema updates. This is so that your system administrator can use the tool that we've written to apply the schema in a safe maintenance window using a secure and safe application user. You don't want your web application having permissions to say, drop the tables in the database. However, we are going to go with true in this dev test scenario. The last thing that I need to do here, though, is provide a default password for the SQL account. Now, I'm going to make something up, but I'm sure what you have will be more secure. And we should be ready to go. Okay, so now we should be ready. I'm going to hit review and create, kick off the template. Okay, so now it's submitted. This process should take a few minutes, and we should have our Fireserver up and running. but we didn't have to actually compile any code. All right, well, let's hope the Azure is fast today. Looking good. A few more seconds. Okay, so once the deployment is finished, we can go into the resource group, and here we can see the resources that were created as part of the template. So we've got the SQL Server, a key vault for the secrets, the website, the app service plan, and of course the database. So let's jump into the app service. It's going to show me the URL in here. And I should be able to grab and copy that. And now we're going to test hitting it in a REST client. So my new favorite REST extension in Visual Studio Code. And all I'm going to do is hit this metadata endpoint. Hit send. Yeah, perfect. There it is. Okay, let's jump back to the slides. Okay, in the next scenario, I want to look at using the Docker containers. So let's jump back into the Fireserver for Azure's website. And this time I'm going to go into the samples repository, templates. So I've just deployed the default template using web deploy, which is the SQL one just there. The equivalent template would be the Docker container. Why would you want to do this? Well, one reason is that the Docker containers will run on a Linux app service, which may be appropriate in certain scenarios where you have a Linux app service plan. And also, the Docker containers and Docker deployments give you better control over which versions and which images you deploy the Fire service with. But for now, let's have a look at how we can run the Azure API for Fire locally without building any codes. So let's look in samples, Docker, here it is. So here we've got a run through guide of how you can run the Docker containers in a variety of situations. So it's taking you through how to both build them or how to run them without building anything with the pre-built images. And although it might be slightly hidden, the command that we're looking for is halfway through the page here. Okay, so let's run this. So if we open up our terminal window, we can see the first command here, and that is just to create the Docker network. Then we're going to need to grab the SQL image, copy that. But before we execute that, we need to make up our super secure password again. And you do note you have to follow the SQL complexity rules, otherwise the container will fail to start. So it's going to pull it down now, hopefully with my super fast internet. Okay, so now for the final command, which will pull down the latest version of the Fireserver for Azure. All right, so before we execute this, we also need to enter in that same super secure password. There it is. And execute. Again, let's pull that down with our super fast internet. We need to accept that. All right, so now let's just check the metadata endpoint, which should be running locally. And back into Visual Studio Code. Going to just update that URL to the new metadata endpoint running locally. And there we have it. Locally running Fireserver without compiling any code. Ready to develop against. All right, let's switch back to the slides. Okay, so getting started with a Fireserver developer. So this means that we're interested in downloading the code and running it locally so that we can both build, extend, and develop against it. So to do that, we're going to switch over back to the GitHub repository. And up here, I'm going to make my own fork. This means that if I ever make modifications that I want to submit back, it's going to be super easy for me to create a pull request. So here I have access to my very own Fireserver URL. And in the console, I'm just going to use git. So git clone, put in my URL. I'm going to clone into my Fireserver repository, then change into that directory. And now what I want to do is add the Upstream Remote. So this is going to help me keep my fork up to date. So doing that with the following command, git remote add upstream. Now I'm just going to run a git remote -v to check everything is there. All right, so now git fetch upstream. So I'm pulling down all the latest code from the official repository. And just to keep the latest master up to date, going to do a git merge upstream master. And this should fast forward merge me into the latest code. All right, and there you have it. Now I'm ready to start building. Okay, so for this, you can use whatever editor you're most comfortable with. All right, I'm going to try to jump into my demo folder here.
Yeah. Victor.
And what we want to do is search for the Fireserver solution. Load that up. Okay, so once it's loaded, so before we can successfully debug, we just need to check a few things. So the first one is we want to check the global JSON to see what version of .NET is currently being used. And if you want to look through a full list of requirements for running the application, then we can do that by jumping back to the official Fireserver repository. Jump into the wiki once we get there. Here we go. And we can look at the build and debug locally page. So in here is a complete list for everything that you need to get going locally. So if we want to use the Cosmos DB provider, we need to have the local emulator installed. Or if you're interested in using export, then we'll need to install the Azure Storage emulator as well. For the SQL provider, we simply need either just the developer version, or you could even get away with the Docker container. For now, I'm just going to use the Cosmos DB one for this demo. Yep, so now it's important just to start that from the start menu and hit OK. And just to show the storage emulator, I'm going to start that as well. Yep, wait for a few seconds for these to start. Okay, after we've done that, we should be able to just run and debug the application. All right, so there it goes. Cool, looks like it's up and running. All right, so once it's there, I'm going to sub in the new metadata endpoint. Delete and test that, send. Oops. So as an example of being able to use some of the new features, if I was to say go down here and say put a patient. So I'm going to put a US core example patient, and I'm just going to copy in that URL for patient. Yep, use lowercase. And I'm just going to use the simple JSON content type. And post that in. So here we've discovered that we've got an unauthorized exception. So you have a choice, and by default, it works with authentication tokens. But if you don't want to work with it for these purposes, you know, of like a small demo, you can go and turn it off. So let's do that now. So all we need to do is find the application settings.json and that set the security to false. All right, that's it. So as soon as I come back here, and I'll hit send request again. There we have it. My patient has been successfully stored. So back to the example of seeing some of the new features. So what I want to do is test the ability to re-index a patient. So in the future, we will have the ability to manage the C search parameters, but for now, we just have to manually insert them and edit the code. So I'm going to look for a file called searchparameters.json in R4. Next, I'm going to add one of the US core extensions. And this one is for patient race. And I think it is just missing a closing bracket. All right, so we're just going to rebuild with just this one change. And while that spins up, now we can see that everything might be working correctly. And I'll paste in the search with the patient race data. And it's currently being ignored from the URL. But we have a function available where we can force reindexing on a single resource. So of course this will be all documented as we get closer to release. And if we do that again, we can see it's still being ignored because the database isn't fully reindexed. So to test, we've introduced a header so that we can test partial indexes so that we know things are working as expected. And if we do it again, we can see that it's included in the self link. And if we scroll down, we can see that it has returned that example US, the US core patient. All right, so let's jump back to the slides. So in this next section, we're going to go into how you can test the latest features coming out of the open source project before they make it into the managed service. And to do that, we're going to go back to the GitHub repository. This one. All right, so we're going to go back to the docs and testing releases, which is the link that was in the slides before. And if we go down here, we detail how the process works. So the open source project is released roughly every 2 weeks. And using this guide, you'll have maybe about a week to a week and a half to test the features before they make it into the Azure API for FHIR managed service. So what you should look out for is if we find any behaviors that could be potentially breaking, we'll flag them with one of these labels so that you can keep an eye on these and test them with your software to make sure that everything is going to go as planned. We've also detailed a small guide of what you can do if you do find an issue. So how can you do it? And the thing that I want to run through here is how the build tagging system works. So for the tagging system, if you use the tag which is currently master, you'll get the latest from the main branch. If you use the release tag, you'll be able to use the code that has been released in the latest release cycle. So this is the one that you'll want to focus on because this is the one that will make it into the managed service next. Or if you want to try a specific release, you can do that by putting in the release number. So, yeah. So here's the guide. And the fastest way to do this, because it's probably going to be a transient environment, is to do it quickly via scripts. This script here is designed to be run in Azure, in the Cloud Shell. So let's spin that up. So I'm just going to paste the few things in here to make this go a little bit quicker. So these are the commands from the scripts. So give your test resource a name. And now I'm going to paste in the resource group in US West 2. And the final step is we want to pass in that Docker template that we discussed earlier. And yep, it'll default to the latest release tag. And now it's going to just probably run for a little while. Hopefully the cloud is having a good day. Whew, okay, there we have it. And if we load up the metadata URL, all right, we'll ping the endpoint to make sure everything went well now. Oops, yeah, I think I might have just been a little bit too early. Sometimes it takes just a little while for the Docker container to initialize. Ah, there we have it. Whew, yeah, I was worried. Yeah, that's it for the guide. So now you're ready to test against the latest version of Fireserver for Azure, which is the features that will be shipped into Azure API for FHIR. So just to recap, the things that I would look out for are anything that has been tagged as a warning or breaking. And then if we skip into the release page, you can sort of go through the fine-grained details of what's being shipped. Cool. Let's go back to the slides. There they are. Okay, so FAQ. What do I do if I've found a bug? So let's jump back to the open source project. This one I think is pretty easy. Hit issue, new issue. Now we've got a number of templates that you can use depending on what your question or issue is. So for features, you can use user stories. For open questions, we have a new question template. And for bug reports, I think that one's pretty obvious. Yep. Okay, I need a feature. Well, the best thing to do for that is, again, head back to the GitHub repository and open a new user story. So we like to track these in the open so that you can get notified when things change. So where do I go if I need help? So I'll detail a little bit about this on the next slide. But you can always open a question on the GitHub repository. We also do monitor the FHIR chat, and we also do monitor Stack Overflow as well. So when will I see an OSS feature in the managed service? And I guess this all depends. So if it's a smaller feature or something that's incremental, then it will ship on our regular cadence. So that happens about every 2 weeks. If it's something bigger, it may be behind a feature flag for probably a little bit longer before it can make it into the managed service. But in general, you can play around with all the new features like I showed in the open source project first. Okay, so I need to add some custom business logic. Where can I add it? So for this, we have a couple of options, and let's just jump back to the home page and let's scroll down to more information. So we have here, if you don't want to modify the code and you want to keep all your logic separate from that, we're now linking to the separate Fireserver proxy, which is a sample architecture produced by one of our other teams. And this shows you how to proxy calls to the Fireserver so that you can extend without having to modify any of the actual Fireserver code. And another option, if you do want to sort of jump in and modify the code, get your hands dirty, we have a pattern called behaviors and interceptors. So within our project, we use a mediator pipeline. And with this, it's pretty easy to inject behaviors that can intercept the requests so that you can do your own custom logic before the response is returned. So these two approaches are pretty common that I've seen out there in the community already. So what did we learn today? So we've started with a brief overview of what Fireserver for Azure is. Next, we looked at a whole variety of topics, such as how you can extend as an application developer, as a Fireserver developer, or as somebody testing for the managed service. So we also looked at how you can contribute to the project and what to inspect, including all of the improved documentation. So we've also seen a number of the community FAQs. And yeah, up next, how can you contact us? So you can contact me in the speaker gallery on Hoover. I'm available on chat.fire.org. You can email my team at fireserverforazure@microsoft.com, which includes more than me. And I'm also available on Twitter. So thank you very much. And yeah, I'm looking forward to Q&A.
Thank you, Brendan, for your pre-recording, your very first pre-recording, right?
Hey,
You told me.
stop sharing. There you go.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Thank you.
I can allow for the audience to unmute themselves if you want questions that way. And I think there's a question in Hoover that's yet to be answered.
Yep. Yeah, we can answer them now.
Okay, so I'm going to allow the participants to unmute themselves. If they want to ask a question, they can just simply unmute and then ask away.
Yep. Okay, that sounds good.
And the question that they had posted in Hoover is this one: does the OSS Fireserver support validation?
So the answer to that is not yet. So probably you hear this often, but validation is definitely something that is on our roadmap, and we're looking at that at the moment. But the server itself doesn't do any validation apart from the, some very sort of basic validation for resources coming in. But we will have more validation support in the future. But I'm going to escape the clause of giving you an exact timeline.
Okay, Doug asked a good question. Can you overview the target market for this platform, e.g., is it to operate parallel to the normal EHR Fireserver and/or to augment and/or displace applications that would otherwise go directly to the EHR vendor's FS?
Good question. And again, I'm going to say it's not meant to necessarily be competitive with EHRs. So I've seen it work well in architectures that do also have EHRs. And some of those could be like health information exchanges and things like that. So where you want like a central aggregation point in the cloud, or you need a place to sort of like bring data together to perform, sort of analytics in a later step, or de-identification, or something else like that. So it's not meant to necessarily displace, but I see it as kind of like a complementary thing that you can sort of like use in the cloud for different types of health architectures.
Okay, Hugh just asked a question. How close is your R5 build kept to the current build? To the current build. I'm assuming, so if I'm going to paraphrase, how close is it kept to the current build? If you're meaning the current build of like the FHIR specification, so we are relying on our good friends at FHIR. So we're using those community libraries. So whenever they sort of like hit, I guess the next milestone, we sort of bring them into our build and update our source code there. So we're not usually too far behind that. Yep. And another question from Doug. How does the managed FS synchronize with the EHR FS?
Okay, so we don't synchronize with EHRs at this point. So not at least me or my team directly. There may be other, I guess, teams or places around Microsoft that might do that, but certainly, we are not focusing on that. We're just focusing on the Fireserver product.
Okay, so those are all the questions that we have within Whova. Is there anyone in the audience here that wants to unmute themselves or ask to unmute and ask a question? Now is a great time to do that. All right. Please check one last time here.
Or maybe, Victor, maybe we ask Brendan whether you would like to add something which you might have forgotten during your recording, or wanted to add something to your presentation.
Yeah, you know what though, Doug did add a caveat to this. My question was, how does the Azure FS sync with the EHR FS?
EHR Fireserver, you mean?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we don't, yeah, we still don't, I mean, maybe I'm not sort of understanding, and we can sort of take this offline as well. But we don't synchronize like our Fireserver with any EHRs, I guess. If I'm not understanding, yeah, please contact me after and we can sort of figure that out.
Okay.
Sounds good. Cool. I guess just let me see if I can share this screen again. I'm getting a Mac OS permission. But yeah, like all the links that I've used in this presentation are available, in the slide deck. So, if you grab that, you should be able to see like, everything that I've walked through.
So yeah, all useful stuff. And yeah, showing off the new open source features is, personally something that I'm the most excited about. So if you wanted to try like the anonymization and de-identification libraries in bulk export, so that's in the managed service, and you can sort of grab either the code or one of the latest builds and try that out. So I think that's pretty exciting. And also the new sort of like custom search and re-indexing stuff as well, which is still only in the open source version, and you can sort of grab that and try that out as well. So yeah, definitely exciting stuff in there. I can't wait till it makes it to the managed service, but until that happens, it's your first look, I guess.
Very
Okay.
good.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Brandon, see you all at the bingo in 10 minutes time. Thank you, Brandon. See you next time, virtual or live.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.